Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Joe Davis, Southern New Hampshire University. We're going to talk about Milestone 2 here in CJ 202. You have to write a supplemental report. Uh, Police report writing and note taking, this whole process is a little difficult to master without being able to have an exchange with your field training officer, with your professor. So what I've tried to do is give you suggested steps. The first one is read the witness statements. You don't get to talk to somebody, so that's very difficult. So you're going to read these statements. The second thing is I would suggest that you take notes from that written statement just as you would in the field talking to Mrs. Perkins. And that'll help you practice your note-taking skills. It'll help you properly organize your supplemental report. Because remember, in this report there are two chronological orders. The very first is the order of your activities. You got the call, you were told to talk to her, you went and talked to her, she told you the information, and you wrote a report. The second is the order of the event, or in this case, what is it that Mr. and Mrs. Perkins did? They heard the commotion, the yelling, the fighting, the breaking glass, they listened, all those sorts of things, and then they called the police. Okay? So there are two orders. So taking notes will help you keep that straight. The third, some information is missing from this report, this interview, because you're working off a written statement. So what I would encourage you to do is try to indicate in your notes, and therefore in your supplemental report, what's missing. The first example would be you don't have the DOB, the date of birth, for Mrs. Perkins. So I would indicate it in parentheses after her name, Perkins, comma, Penelope, unknown DOB. Most police officers will always write the date of birth of people they talk to help identify them later. If for whatever reason you can't find them, you think they lied to you, you want to check and see if they have warrants, maybe you want to look at their criminal history. If you have that full name and DOB, date of birth, it's much easier. So that's just a habit. The second one is that by writing last name first in capital letters, an old-fashioned way of doing it, still taught all across this country, it makes it easy for you to determine who these folks are. Plus, that's the way you probably would enter it into most computer systems to search. Okay, so those are the steps that I would encourage you to take. All right, we're going to look at some sample notes. I made a little outline of a sample note. Think of your milestone 1 assignment and follow the correct format and information. These notes do not have to be submitted with the supplemental report, okay? They're just there to help you practice and correctly organize your information. So everything up to this point is not required. It's just my suggestion to help you get through this assignment. Okay, here's what your notes might look like. Perkins interview, the date June the 16th. The witness statement doesn't tell us what time you talked to him, so of course in real life you would. The street address is actually the same street address as the where the crime occurred. That's fine, we'll use that address. That's not where you talked to the Perkins. And what I got out of the written statement is Perkins told me the following: that earlier this evening at an unknown time, she and her husband Jerry Perkins here arguing. Mary Sue and Paul are fighting again. It's getting louder, out of hand, lots of fights, not as bad as today. Mr. and Mrs. Perkins were inside their home, fight really loud. She heard Mary Sue yelling at Paul, couldn't hear what was said. I have a typo there that she couldn't hear what was said. There was a loud crash, something breaking. She called the police. She never heard anything break before. Mary Sue had complained to her that Paul had hit her before. Couldn't see inside the house. Mary Sue came out, sat on the porch. She was crying, couldn't see injuries, and the police arrived. Now, those are the notes that I would take. Note taking is very personalized. I use bullet points because the way I would teach you if you were police officers learning to go to work tomorrow is that basically each of those bullet points is the key or topic sentence for your paragraph. So you've conquered paragraph development at the same time. All right, that's an example of sample notes. You do not have to submit that. Okay, here might be a supplemental report, a sample for that. Put your name up at the top. We don't have a pre-printed form, so at least I know whose paper this is. Okay, And I would write, I was assigned to interview Perkins Penelope, unknown DOB, because she was a witness to a crime across the street. I spoke to Perkins at her home and she told me the following. Earlier this evening at an unknown time, she and her husband Perkins Jerry, unknown DOB, were inside their home when they heard the Joneses arguing across the street. The Joneses were inside their home. She said Mary Sue and Paul were fighting again and it was getting out of hand. They were really loud and none of the previous fights were this loud. Perkins said Mary Sue was yelling at Paul, but she couldn't hear what was said. Then she heard a loud crash like something breaking. That's when she called the police because the Perkins had never broken anything before that she knew about. Perkins did say that Mary Sue had complained to her about Paul hitting her during other arguments. Perkins said they couldn't see inside the house. They did see Mary Sue come out of the house and sit on the porch crying. Before they could check on her, the police arrived. That would be, to me, an acceptable supplemental report narrative that meets all of the elements of the critical elements of the rubric. If you have any questions, please let me know. Remember, this is the only part that needs to be submitted. The other is all a process to help you get to 3 paragraphs. Okay?